April 17, 1943, North Atlantic, 200 miles southwest of Iceland. Kapitänleutnant Ernst Bauer's hands trembled as he gripped the ladder in U-954's control room, not from cold, though the temperature hovered just above freezing, but from something far more disturbing. His hydrophone operator, a 23-year-old Feldwebel named Klaus Hoffmann, had just reported what should have been impossible: a destroyer, bearing 095, range estimated at 25 kilometers. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. 25 kilometers. 15 miles. The number made no sense. Bauer had commanded U-954 through 8 war patrols. He knew the ocean's acoustic properties, as well as any submarine officer in the Kriegsmarine. German doctrine, tested through years of operations, held that enemy hydrophones could detect submarines at perhaps 8 to 10 kilometers under optimal conditions. Beyond that distance, the ocean absorbed sound, thermal layers scattered it, and ambient noise masked it. 15 miles was beyond the realm of possibility, yet Hoffmann was not a novice. He'd been listening to the Atlantic for 14 months, distinguishing whale song from merchant propellers, fishing trawlers from destroyers, false contacts from genuine threats. His face, illuminated by the faint red glow of the control room's emergency lighting, showed no uncertainty. Just fear. "Kapitän," Hoffmann whispered, his voice barely audible above the electric motor's hum. "The contact is steady. Bearing has not changed in 4 minutes. The destroyer is heading directly toward us." Bauer felt his stomach tighten. U-954 was running at periscope depth, making barely 4 knots, a ghost moving through the dark water. They had transmitted no radio signals, no aircraft had been overhead. The ocean around them was empty, or should have been. How could a destroyer know where to find them? If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Bauer made the only decision that made tactical sense. Take us to 200 meters, silent running. Shut down everything except life support and propulsion. Throughout the submarine, 46 men froze at their stations. The boat angled downward, descending into the cold depths where German commanders believed they were safe, where the darkness and pressure created sanctuary. But something had changed in the Atlantic. Something the Kriegsmarine's intelligence officers had failed to detect, failed to understand, failed to warn their submarine commanders about. The ocean no longer protected German U-boats the way it had for 3 years. Allied scientists had unlocked acoustic secrets that transformed submarine warfare fundamentally, and commanders like Bauer were discovering this truth in the worst possible way, while being hunted through waters that had suddenly become transparent. The morning of April 17th began like so many others aboard U-954. The submarine had departed Lorient 11 days earlier, assigned to patrol the convoy route southwest of Iceland. Their orders were straightforward: locate Allied convoys, report their positions to Admiral Dönitz's headquarters, coordinate with other U-boats in a wolfpack attack. The tactics had worked brilliantly through 1940, 41, and 42. Submarines operating in coordinated groups had sent millions of tons of Allied shipping to the bottom. But April 1943 was different, though Bauer didn't yet understand why. The previous month, German U-boats had sunk 97 merchant ships, totaling over 500,000 tons. It seemed like the campaign was succeeding. What Bauer and other commanders didn't know was that March 1943 represented the absolute peak of U-boat effectiveness. The technological and tactical balance was already shifting decisively against them. At 0600 hours, U-954 had surfaced to recharge batteries and ventilate the boat. The conning tower lookouts scanned a grey, empty horizon. No ships, no aircraft. Nothing but rolling swells and scattered clouds. Perfect conditions for a surface transit. Bauer ordered the diesel engines started, and for 2 hours the submarine cruised on the surface, pushing east toward the convoy routes. At 0800 hours, Bauer ordered the boat submerged. Standard procedure. Daylight meant increased risk of aircraft detection. They would run submerged through the day, then surface again after dark. U-954 slipped beneath the waves and settled at periscope depth, 60 feet down, moving at a leisurely 4 knots to conserve battery power. This was when Hoffman first heard it, a faint, rhythmic pulse in his headphones. He adjusted the hydrophone array, rotating it slowly to determine bearing. The sound was so distant, so faint, that for 10 minutes he said nothing, unwilling to report a contact he wasn't certain about. German hydrophone training emphasized accuracy over speed. False alarms disrupted operations and damaged a hydrophone operator's credibility. But the sound persisted, grew incrementally stronger. Hoffman checked his equipment, verified it was functioning correctly, then triple-checked his bearing calculations. Finally, at 08:15, he reported to the watch officer. Possible contact. Bearing 095, very distant. Propeller characteristics suggest a destroyer. The watch officer, Oberleutnant zur See Wolfgang Richter, immediately woke Bauer. In the cramped confines of a submarine at sea, the commanding officer sleeps when he can, knowing he might be called at any moment. Bauer was in the control room within 30 seconds, pulling on his leather jacket against the cold, his mind shifting instantly from sleep to full alertness. "Report," he ordered. Richter explained the contact. Bauer moved to the hydrophone station and took the headphones from Hoffman. He listened carefully, his experienced ears analyzing what he heard. There, a distant rhythmic pattern, almost subliminal, but definitely mechanical, definitely propellers. The bearing was steady. That meant the source was moving directly toward them or directly away. Given that the sound was growing slightly louder, it had to be approaching. But the distance. Bauer knew from extensive training and operational experience that hydrophones detected contacts at specific ranges depending on conditions. In the cold North Atlantic, with its temperature gradients and variable salinity, those ranges were predictable. A surfaced submarine might hear a destroyer at 8 to 10 kilometers. A destroyer might detect a submerged submarine at 6 to 8 kilometers if the submarine made noise. This contact was beyond those ranges. Significantly beyond. Bauer checked the time and made a calculation. If the destroyer was making standard patrol speed, roughly 18 knots, and the contact had been first detected at 08:15, and it was now 08:25, he worked through the numbers. The destroyer had to be at least 20 kilometers away, possibly 25. This violated everything Bauer understood about underwater acoustics. The ocean couldn't transmit propeller noise that far. Temperature layers should refract the sound waves upward toward the surface, where they'd dissipate. The inverse pressure gradient at depth should bend sound downward. There should be shadow zones, acoustic blind spots, areas where sound simply couldn't reach. Yet here was undeniable evidence. A destroyer, detectable at impossible range, heading directly toward them as if guided by precise intelligence about their location. Bauer considered the possibilities. Had an aircraft spotted them during their surface run? Possible, but unlikely. The lookouts had been vigilant, scanning constantly. Radar would have detected any approaching aircraft. Had they been tracked by radio direction finding? U-954 had transmitted no signals since leaving Lorient. Enigma communications security had been maintained perfectly. The only remaining explanation was the one Bauer didn't want to believe. Allied detection technology had improved dramatically beyond what German intelligence assessed. The Americans and British had developed hydrophone systems with range and sensitivity that exceeded German equivalents by factors that made previous tactical assumptions obsolete. This was the moment thousands of U-boat commanders experienced throughout 1943 and 44, the moment when the ocean's rules changed, when assumptions proven through years of successful operations suddenly became dangerous misconceptions. When the hunter realized he'd become the prey, the path toward this transformation had begun years earlier, in the laboratories and research facilities, where Allied scientists approached underwater acoustics not as a solved problem, but as a frontier requiring systematic investigation. While German engineers focused on improving submarine capabilities, attacking technology and torpedo design, Allied researchers obsessed over detection. They asked fundamental questions about how sound moved through seawater under various conditions of temperature, pressure, and salinity. At the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts, Dr. Maurice Ewing led teams conducting extensive acoustic experiments. They dropped explosive charges into the ocean at various depths and measured how far the sound traveled. They mapped temperature gradients throughout the water column. They studied how seasonal changes affected sound propagation. They discovered that the ocean wasn't a uniform medium but a complex layered environment where sound behaved in ways that defied simple intuition. British scientists at the Admiralty Research Laboratory in Teddington pursued parallel investigations. They refined ASDIC technology, the active sonar system that transmitted acoustic pulses and listened for echoes, but they also recognized ASDIC's limitations. Active sonar revealed the searching ship's position to any submarine equipped with basic hydrophones. What the Allies needed was improved passive listening capability, systems that could detect submarines from their own machinery noise without broadcasting the hunter's location. The breakthrough came through understanding acoustic propagation channels. Allied researchers discovered that under specific temperature and pressure conditions, sound didn't radiate outward uniformly and dissipate. Instead, it could be trapped in layers where temperature and pressure gradients created acoustic ducts. Sound waves entering these ducts at the correct angle would be refracted continuously, bouncing between boundaries, traveling horizontally for distances that seemed impossible. In the North Atlantic, seasonal variations created these conditions frequently. Winter storms mixed surface waters, creating near isothermal layers that extended down 100 meters or more. Below that, the main thermocline showed relatively gentle temperature gradients compared to warmer seas. This meant sound generated at certain depths, particularly in the frequency range produced by submarine propellers, could propagate much farther than German doctrine predicted. The discovery was accidental at first, observed during routine testing of improved hydrophone arrays. American destroyers equipped with new QHB sonar systems reported detecting submarine contacts at ranges that seemed like equipment errors. Operators reported contacts at 15 to 18 kilometers that subsequent investigations confirmed were genuine. Engineers analyzed the data and realized they were observing a natural phenomenon that could be exploited tactically. By early 1943, Allied anti-submarine forces understood they possessed a significant advantage. Their hydrophone systems, combined with proper understanding of acoustic conditions, could detect U-boats at ranges where the submarine's own equipment couldn't hear the hunting ships. This created a tactical situation unprecedented in submarine warfare. The hunted could be tracked without knowing hunters were nearby. The implications were profound. A destroyer detecting a U-boat at 15 or 20 kilometers had enormous time to coordinate attacks. It could call in other escorts to establish a perimeter. It could track the submarine's movements without rushing to attack. It could position itself for the perfect approach, where the submarine would be trapped with no escape route. German U-boat doctrine, developed when both sides had roughly equivalent detection capabilities, assumed submarines would have warning before escorts got close. The standard evasion playbook, go deep, run silent, creep away at minimum speed, worked only if you knew you were being hunted. If escorts could track you from beyond your own detection range, you had no warning. You continued operating normally while hunters plotted your destruction. This was the new reality Bauer faced at 08:25 on April 17, 1943. Somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond his ability to see or hear them, Allied warships knew exactly where U-954 was located. They were tracking his submarine's every movement, coordinating their approach, preparing to attack at the moment of maximum advantage. And Bauer had no idea how hopeless his situation had already become. The destroyer tracking U-954 was HMS Duncan, a Town-class vessel commanded by Commander Peter Gretton, one of the Royal Navy's most experienced anti-submarine warfare officers. Duncan's sonar room, a space barely larger than a walk-in closet, contained equipment that represented 3 years of intensive development compressed into compact, efficient packages. The QHB passive sonar system feeding Duncan's hydrophone operators was a masterpiece of incremental engineering improvement. Each hydrophone element in the array had been carefully calibrated. The amplification circuits reduced background noise by factors of 10 compared to equipment from 1941. Most critically, the system incorporated frequency filtering that isolated the specific acoustic signatures produced by submarine propellers. A submarine's propeller created distinctive cavitation patterns, rhythmic pulses that occurred in narrow frequency bands between 200 and 800 Hz. Surface ships generated noise across much broader spectrums. By filtering out everything except those narrow bands, operators could detect submarine signatures from general ocean noise at ranges that would be impossible with raw, unfiltered listening. It was like trying to hear a whisper in a crowded room, except you had equipment that blocked every sound except whispers. The technical advantage was enormous, and German intelligence had completely failed to assess its significance. Duncan's senior hydrophone operator, a 34-year-old chief petty officer named Thomas Carlyle, had detected U-954 at 07:55, 20 minutes before Hoffman first heard Duncan. Carlyle had been operating sonar equipment since 1940. He knew the acoustic signature of Type Sevic U-boats intimately, the particular rhythm of their propellers, the frequency characteristics of their electric motors, even the subtle differences between boats with slightly different propeller designs. When that distinctive pattern appeared in his headphones, faint but unmistakable, Carlyle immediately informed Commander Gretton. A contact. Bearing 270 degrees, range estimated at 27 kilometers, based on signal strength and acoustic conditions. Gretton checked the Bathy thermograph data, the device that measured temperature at various depths. Conditions were favorable for long-range detection. A near isothermal surface layer extended down to 120 meters, with a gentle gradient below that. Sound propagation would be excellent. Gretton made no immediate move to intercept. That was the old way, charging toward contacts and hoping to maintain them during high-speed approaches. The new doctrine, developed through painful experience and systematic analysis of successful hunts, required patience. Track the submarine, plot its course and speed, calculate where it would be in 30 minutes, an hour, then coordinate with other escorts to establish a trap. Duncan maintained its patrol course, appearing to ignore the U-boat completely. Carlyle continued tracking, updating bearing and estimated range every 5 minutes. The data revealed that U-954 was maintaining a steady course, making approximately 4 knots. The submarine's commander had no idea he was being tracked. This was exactly the situation Allied anti-submarine forces had trained to exploit. At 08:05, Gretton radioed encrypted contact information to HMS Vimy and HMCS Skeena, 2 other escorts operating in the area. The message included U-954's position, course, speed, and projected track. The 3 ships began executing a coordinated maneuver that would trap the submarine between them. Vimy altered course to position herself 8 kilometers ahead of the U-boat's track. Skeena moved to establish a blocking position to the north. Duncan continued following at long range, maintaining sonar contact. This was the hunter-killer doctrine perfected by Captain Frederick Johnny Walker, the Royal Navy's most successful anti-submarine commander. Walker commanded the 2nd Support Group, 5 sloops that had developed submarine destruction into an industrial process. His innovation was treating long-range detection not as a prelude to immediate attack, but as the opening move in a chess game that might take hours to complete. The tactics required discipline that contradicted every instinct of aggressive pursuit. When you detected a U-boat, you didn't rush toward it. You positioned yourself and your supporting ships to control the submarine's options. You closed the trap slowly, methodically, cutting off escape routes before the submarine even knew it was trapped. By 08:20, when Hoffman first detected Duncan, the trap was already forming. U-954's estimated position was known to 3 Allied warships. Vimy was ahead, positioned where the submarine would be in 40 minutes if it maintained course. Skeena was moving into position to the north. Duncan followed from behind, maintaining perfect sonar contact, adjusting its own course to match every turn the submarine made. When Bauer ordered U-954 deep to 200 meters, all three escorts tracked the maneuver through their hydrophone arrays. The submarine's depth change altered its acoustic signature slightly, but the fundamental propeller noise remained detectable. More importantly, going deeper didn't make the submarine quieter. The electric motors still ran, the propellers still turned, the sound still propagated through the favorable acoustic conditions that morning. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Bauer didn't know it, but his decision to go deep actually made tracking easier. At 200 meters, U-954 was running in a layer where temperature was stable and pressure effects dominated sound propagation. This created slightly better acoustic transmission conditions than at shallow depths, where surface noise and wave action created interference. Duncan's hydrophone operators noted the depth change and adjusted their tracking accordingly. For 40 minutes, U-954 crept through the depths, while three escorts maneuvered into position. Bauer maintained strict silent running protocols. Men moved only when absolutely necessary. Speech was reduced to whispered monosyllables. Even breathing became conscious, controlled, quiet. Every crew member understood the situation. A destroyer was somewhere above them, searching. Their survival depended on remaining undetectable, but they were already detected, had been detected for over an hour, and the net was closing. At 0900 hours, WWII obtained solid sonar contact at 4 kilometers range. The submarine was approaching directly toward WWII's position, precisely as Gretton had calculated. Commander James Rowland, WWII's captain, slowed his ship to 12 knots to reduce his own propeller noise. He wanted to maintain sonar contact as long as possible before committing to an attack run. At 0910, Hoffman reported to Bauer that he was detecting two separate contacts now. Bearing 095, which had been tracked for almost an hour, and a new contact, bearing 045. Both contacts appeared to be destroyers. Both appeared to be converging. Bauer felt cold realization spreading through his chest. This wasn't an accidental encounter with a single escort. This was a coordinated hunt. Somehow, despite U-954's silence, despite their depth, despite every evasion measure, the enemy knew where they were. Knew well enough to position multiple ships for a coordinated attack. The mathematics became unavoidable. U-954 could run on batteries for perhaps 8 to 10 hours at current speed before power levels dropped dangerously low. The destroyers above could hunt indefinitely, their fuel tanks providing days of endurance. The submarine couldn't surface to recharge batteries while under attack, couldn't run at high speed without depleting batteries in minutes, couldn't fight back against surface ships while submerged. Every option led toward the same conclusion: eventual surfacing, either to surrender or to fight with deck guns in a battle they couldn't win. Bauer ordered a course change. 90 degrees to starboard, hoping to slip away from the converging contacts. U-954 turned slowly, electric motors straining to push the boat through the water without creating excessive propeller noise. For 15 minutes, Bauer thought the maneuver might succeed. Hoffman reported that both contacts seemed to be falling behind, but at 0930, Hoffman's voice carried unmistakable alarm. Kapitän, third contact. Bearing 180. Range close. Very close. Skeena had positioned herself perfectly. While Bauer concentrated on the contacts ahead and to his right, the Canadian corvette had approached from directly astern, where U-954's own propeller noise masked approaching threats. Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Adams, Skeena's commander, had timed his approach beautifully. He'd allowed Duncan and WWII to push the submarine toward him, then positioned himself in the U-boat's acoustic shadow. At 0935, Skeena accelerated to attack speed and obtained active ASDIC contact at 800 yards. The familiar metallic pinging rang through U-954's hull, a sound every submariner had been trained to fear. Active sonar meant the enemy knew exactly where you were, meant depth charges were being prepared, meant the killing was about to begin. Bauer had seconds to make a decision that would determine whether his crew lived or died. Conventional doctrine called for going deeper, running silent, trying to evade beneath the hunting ships. But Bauer recognized that conventional tactics had already failed. His submarine had been tracked for over an hour by detection systems he couldn't counter. Going deeper would only delay the inevitable. "Surface the boat," he ordered. "Battle stations, prepare to engage with deck armament." The crew stared at him for one frozen moment. Surfacing while under attack was admitting defeat, but remaining submerged meant slow death by depth charges while batteries drained and air fouled. At least on the surface, they could fight. Could potentially damage one of the escorts badly enough that the others broke off. Could go down fighting rather than suffocating in a steel coffin at the bottom of the Atlantic. U-954 blew ballast and rose rapidly toward the surface. At 09:42, the conning tower broke through the waves into weak morning sunlight. Bauer scrambled up the ladder, followed by his gun crews, and saw all three escorts simultaneously. Duncan 3 kilometers to the east, Vimy 2 kilometers to the north, Skeena just 800 meters astern, already turning to bring her 4.7-inch main guns to bear. The surface action lasted less than 4 minutes. U-954's 8.8-centimeter deck gun managed 3 rounds before Skeena's first salvo struck the conning tower, killing Bauer and 2 lookouts instantly. Duncan and Vimy closed at flank speed, their guns firing methodically. The submarine's pressure hull was punctured in a dozen places. Water flooded into the control room and forward torpedo compartment. Oberleutnant Richter, now in command, ordered "abandon ship." 32 men made it into the water before U-954 went under stern first at 09:46. Skeena and Vimy lowered boats and retrieved 28 survivors. 4 men, including Feldwebel Hoffmann, the hydrophone operator who had first detected Duncan at impossible range, drowned in the cold Atlantic waters. The interrogation of U-954's survivors provided British intelligence with valuable information about German understanding of Allied detection capabilities. What became clear was that German commanders had no conception of how dramatically sonar technology had improved. They still believed in detection ranges of 6 to 8 kilometers. The reality that Allied escorts could track submarines from 15 to 25 kilometers under favorable acoustic conditions was completely unknown to them. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. This knowledge gap persisted throughout 1943 and into 44. German U-boat headquarters received increasing reports of submarines being detected at seemingly impossible ranges, of destroyers that appeared to know submarine positions without being detected themselves, of coordinated attacks that implied precise intelligence about U-boat locations. But German analysis consistently attributed these incidents to other factors: broken Enigma codes, betrayal, superior radar, even speculation about psychic warfare research. The simple truth that Allied hydrophone technology had leaped forward while German intelligence slept was never adequately grasped by Dönitz's staff. They made incremental improvements to German hydrophones, increased sensitivity, added directional capability. But they never closed the gap because they didn't understand how large the gap had become. Meanwhile, Allied anti-submarine forces exploited their advantage ruthlessly. By May 1943, every escort in the North Atlantic carried improved passive sonar systems. Operators were trained to recognize submarine acoustic signatures at extended ranges. Doctrine emphasized patient tracking over immediate engagement. The hunter-killer groups perfected tactics that gave submarines no warning before being trapped. The statistics told a brutal story. In May 1943, Admiral Dönitz lost 41 U-boats, not over months or years. 41 boats in 31 days, nearly a quarter of his operational fleet. The exchange ratio had inverted completely. Where once 10 merchant ships sank for every U-boat lost, now submarines died faster than they could sink targets. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz made the most painful decision of his career. He ordered all U-boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic convoy routes. The official reason was temporary, redeployment for equipment upgrades. The real reason was that continuing current operations meant losing his entire submarine fleet within 3 months. The wolf packs that had dominated the Atlantic for 3 years were retreating, and extended-range acoustic detection was the primary reason why. The Allies had learned to hear through darkness, through depth, through distance, and that single technological advantage had changed everything. German naval intelligence spent the remainder of 1943 and into 44 trying to understand what had happened. They investigated Enigma security, eventually confirming correctly that Allied codebreakers were reading German communications. They studied radar technology, developing new detectors and countermeasures. They researched acoustic countermeasures, developing the Pillenwerfer chemical decoy and bold balloon system. But they never fully appreciated the fundamental acoustic revolution that had occurred. Their own hydrophones, improved incrementally, but remained oriented toward detecting targets for attack, rather than detecting hunters before being detected. German submarines continued using passive listening as a defensive measure, hoping to hear approaching escorts in time to evade. But they were hearing at 6 to 8 kilometers while being tracked from 15 to 25. The gap never closed because German understanding of ocean acoustics remained rooted in pre-war research. They knew about temperature layers and thermoclines. They understood basic sound refraction principles, but they hadn't conducted the systematic, large-scale studies that Allied researchers pursued. They hadn't mapped acoustic conditions across vast ocean areas. They hadn't discovered the propagation channels that could carry sound far beyond theoretical absorption distances. Allied naval research organizations, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, the University of California Division of War Research, the Admiralty Research Laboratory, all approached underwater acoustics with scientific rigor that created breakthrough after breakthrough. They measured temperature profiles to 100-meter depths. They calculated sound velocity at various temperatures, pressures, and salinities. They mapped how sound bent through water under different seasonal conditions. This research revealed that the North Atlantic, particularly in winter and spring, created acoustic conditions favorable for long-range submarine detection. The relatively gentle temperature gradients, combined with deep isothermal layers, formed natural sound channels that carried low-frequency noise across distances German doctrine said were impossible. German U-boat commanders operating in these waters had no idea they were broadcasting their positions to any Allied ship with properly calibrated hydrophones positioned correctly. They continued following tactical doctrines developed when both sides had equivalent detection capabilities, and they died in numbers that shocked even veteran submariners who understood the risks inherent in undersea warfare. The human cost mounted with horrifying speed through the summer and autumn of 1943. Convoy SC-130, crossing the Atlantic in May, was protected by escorts that detected U-boat concentrations at ranges exceeding 20 kilometers. The escort group commander, Commander Peter Gretton, used extended-range detection to systematically hunt down submarines attempting to approach the convoy. 24 U-boats had been positioned along the convoy's route. Not a single merchant ship was hit. Meanwhile, 5 U-boats were sunk, and 7 more damaged so severely they had to abort their patrols and return to base. Convoy ONS-5, also in May 43, fought off over 30 U-boats in a running battle that lasted days. The escorts used their detection advantage to locate submarines before they could achieve attack positions. Coordinated hunter-killer tactics trapped U-boats between multiple ships. The final accounting showed 5 U-boats sunk for the loss of 12 merchant ships, a ratio that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Individual U-boat commanders filed patrol reports that documented their confusion and frustration. Kapitänleutnant Peter Gerlach, commanding U-403, reported being detected by a destroyer at ranges he estimated exceeded 15 kilometers. Enemy appears to possess detection apparatus of extraordinary range and accuracy, he wrote. Recommend urgent investigation by technical command. Korvettenkapitän Otto von Bülow, a decorated commander with multiple successful patrols, reported that Allied escorts seemed to anticipate every evasive maneuver. We dove deep, maintained absolute silence, changed course repeatedly. The destroyers followed every move as if they could see us through the water. This is not luck, this is technology we do not possess. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was devastating. Unlike surface combat where sailors could see their enemy and fight back, submarine crews under attack could only wait passively while destroyers hunted them. The knowledge that enemy ships could detect them from beyond their own sensing range, could track them continuously without being detected themselves, transformed the underwater environment from a protective sanctuary into a transparent killing field. Veterans of multiple patrols began exhibiting signs of severe stress. Some men refused to eat, their stomachs knotted with constant anxiety. Others slept whenever possible, seeking escape in unconsciousness. A few broke down completely during depth charge attacks, weeping or becoming catatonic. The U-boat service, which had entered the war with elite status and confident crews, became a death sentence that men accepted with fatalistic resignation. The casualty statistics were appalling. Of approximately 40,000 men who served in U-boats during World War II, 30,000 died. A mortality rate of 75%, the highest of any military service in the war. The majority of these losses occurred after May 1943, after Allied sonar systems matured to the point where submarines could be detected at extended ranges and hunted with systematic efficiency. For the German submarine crews who survived the war, the memory of being hunted by invisible enemies remained their most persistent nightmare. In post-war interviews and memoirs, veterans consistently returned to the same themes. The helplessness of being tracked without knowing it, the realization that the ocean no longer protected them, the understanding that they were fighting against technology they couldn't counter. Herbert Werner, one of the few U-boat commanders whose boat survived the war still operational, immigrated to the United States in 1957 and became an American citizen. His memoir, Iron Coffins, published in 1969, included this dedication: to my fallen comrades who rest in iron coffins at the bottom of the sea. In it, he acknowledged a truth that had taken years to accept. We were defeated not primarily by superior courage or numbers, though both played roles, but by technology we did not understand and could not counter. The Allies learned to see through water. We never developed effective means to hide. The technological revolution that gave Allied forces extended-range detection capability had strategic consequences that reached far beyond tactical advantages in individual engagements. British imports of food and war materials, which had fallen to critically low levels by March 1943, recovered dramatically as U-boat effectiveness collapsed. The massive build-up of American forces in Britain for D-Day proceeded without significant interference. The Atlantic supply line, which Winston Churchill later called the only thing that really frightened me during the war, became secure. Germany's bid to strangle Britain through submarine blockade had failed, defeated as much by hydrophones as by depth charges and aircraft. The strategic significance was profound. Without the Atlantic lifeline, Britain couldn't have remained in the war. Without American supplies flowing safely across the ocean, the invasion of Europe would have been impossible. The Battle of the Atlantic was the foundational campaign that enabled everything else. Allied scientists and engineers continued refining their acoustic detection systems through 1944 and into 45. Improvements came in steady increments: better filtering to isolate submarine signatures, more sensitive hydrophone elements, improved processing to distinguish genuine contacts from false returns, refined understanding of how seasonal and regional variations affected sound propagation. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, Allied anti-submarine capabilities had become so dominant that not a single vessel in the massive invasion armada was lost to U-boat attack during the critical first weeks of the Normandy landings. Admiral Dönitz had ordered every available submarine to attack the invasion fleet, 36 U-boats deployed to the English Channel and western approaches. It was a suicidal mission, and everyone knew it. The channel was shallow, restricting submarine maneuverability. Allied air supremacy was absolute. Surface escorts created overlapping sonar coverage that left no gaps. Of the 36 U-boats committed to attacking the invasion, 25 were destroyed, 69% losses in 2 months. The survivors limped back to French ports, damaged, traumatized, their missions failures. Not a single troopship, not one major warship had been sunk. A few landing craft and small vessels had been hit at catastrophic cost in German submarines and lives. The ocean floor off Normandy became littered with U-boat wrecks. Post-war surveys counted 17 submarine hulls in the invasion area, most showing evidence of catastrophic depth charge damage or torpedo hits from Allied submarines. These wrecks became underwater memorials to the futility of sending submarines against an enemy with total sonar and acoustic superiority. German engineers made desperate attempts to restore submarine effectiveness. The Type XXI Electroboot, introduced in the war's final months, represented revolutionary design concepts: streamlined hulls, massive battery capacity enabling sustained submerged speeds of 17 knots, sophisticated noise reduction, advanced snorkel systems that allowed diesel operation while submerged. Had Type XXIs been available in numbers in 1943, they might have altered the battle's outcome. But only 2 Type XXI boats completed combat patrols before Germany's surrender. U-2511, commanded by Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, demonstrated the new submarine's capabilities during a patrol in April and May 1945. The boat successfully evaded Allied anti-submarine forces multiple times, using its superior underwater speed. But even the Type XXI remained vulnerable to acoustic detection. Allied operators adapted quickly to its slightly different acoustic signature. The fundamental problem, that submarines generated detectable noise and Allied hydrophones could hear that noise at extended ranges, remained unsolved. The lessons learned in the Battle of the Atlantic fundamentally reshaped submarine warfare for the next 8 decades. Every navy that operated submarines after 1945 studied those lessons with obsessive attention. The central insight was brutally simple. A submarine that could be detected from beyond its own sensing range was no longer a predator. It was a target. This realization drove decades of technological development that continues today. The Cold War submarine arms race became primarily an acoustic competition. The Soviet Union and the United States poured billions into making submarines quieter and detection systems more sensitive. Soviet engineers studied captured German U-boats and Allied sonar systems, learning everything the Kriegsmarine learned too late. They designed submarines with anechoic coating, rubber tiles that absorbed sonar pings rather than reflecting them. They developed sophisticated propeller designs that minimized cavitation noise. American engineers countered with SOSUS, the sound surveillance system, a network of hydrophones planted on the ocean floor that could detect submarines across entire ocean basins. The detection ranges that shocked U-boat commanders in 1943 became routine by 1960. Soviet submarine commanders in the 1960s and 70s described the psychological impact of Western sonar in terms nearly identical to those used by German submarine veterans. The persistent tracking, the knowledge that the enemy knew their position, the helplessness of being hunted by invisible technology. Nuclear propulsion changed tactical parameters, but didn't change fundamental acoustic realities. USS Nautilus, the first nuclear submarine commissioned in 1954, could stay submerged indefinitely and travel at speeds German U-boats never imagined. But she was also louder than any diesel-electric submarine ever built. Her reactor pumps and reduction gears created broadband noise across multiple frequencies. American SOSUS arrays detected early Soviet nuclear boats, leaving port from hundreds of miles away. The technology that gave Allied destroyers extended range detection in 1943 evolved into systems that achieved 100-mile detection by the 1970s. Towed array sonar, hydrophones trailed behind ships on cables thousands of feet long, removed interference from the towing ship's own propeller noise. Computers replaced human operators for initial signal processing, identifying submarine acoustic signatures automatically, tracking multiple contacts simultaneously. Modern submarine warfare remains dominated by the competition between stealth and detection that emerged in the Battle of the Atlantic. Submarines grow progressively quieter through advanced propeller designs, sophisticated acoustic coatings, machinery mounted on sound-isolating rafts. But detection systems become ever more sensitive. The ocean, despite decades of engineering effort, remains transparent to those who know how to listen. The story of U-954 and thousands of other German submarines hunted through the Atlantic by extended-range acoustic detection stands as testament to how rapidly military technology can shift strategic balance. In 1939, German submarines were essentially invisible when submerged. By 1943, advanced sonar could track them continuously from ranges that made evasion nearly impossible. For the men who served in U-boats, this technological revolution meant more than tactical defeat. It represented fundamental psychological transformation. They entered the war as invisible hunters, confident in their ability to strike and disappear. They finished it as marked prey, constantly detected, perpetually hunted, knowing the ocean no longer protected them. The sound that transformed submarine warfare, the acoustic signatures picked up by improved hydrophones at extended ranges, carried a simple message: invisibility is no longer assured. Surface technology can reach into the depths. There is no sanctuary beneath the waves. German submarine crews, who first experienced detection from impossible distances, paid with their lives to teach lessons that transcend their defeat. Technology transforms warfare faster than training, doctrine, or courage can adapt. Those who fail to recognize technological shifts don't merely lose battles, they lose entire campaigns, entire wars, and very often their lives. The 28 survivors rescued from U-954's crew spent the remainder of the war in prisoner camps in Canada. They were among the lucky ones. Most U-boat crews sank with their boats, dying in the crushing depths or drowning as water flooded through ruptured pressure hulls. The iron coffins that litter the Atlantic floor hold 30,000 stories of men who learned too late that their ocean sanctuary had been stripped away by science. In 1985, 40 years after the war's end, a small gathering of German submarine veterans met informally in the United States. Former U-boat men, some with families, came to see the nation whose technology had defeated them. Among them were several survivors of boats sunk after extended-range detection. They gathered in a hotel conference room in Norfolk, Virginia, not far from the naval base where American destroyers still trained in anti-submarine warfare. One veteran, a former radio operator who had served on 3 different U-boats before being rescued when his final boat was sunk in 1944, spoke for the group. "We came into the war believing in our invincibility beneath the waves," he said. "We were taught that the ocean depths protected us. For a brief time, perhaps a year, this seemed true. Then we encountered your detection systems. That sound, those acoustic signatures our propellers created, that your hydrophones could hear from distances we thought impossible, taught us the ocean no longer hid us." Another veteran, a former commander who had survived 2 sinkings and spent 3 years in POW camps, added, "We learned fear in a way surface sailors never know. We could not see our enemy, could not fight back, could only wait in darkness while your technology hunted us. We were defeated by science, by engineering, by the capacity of free societies to innovate faster than we could adapt." The broader lesson resonates beyond submarine warfare. In modern conflict, technological superiority increasingly determines outcomes regardless of traditional military virtues like courage, training, or tactical skill. The Allied hydrophones that detected German U-boats at extended ranges proved more decisive than the submarine's torpedo tubes, more effective than the crew's courage, more important than the commander's tactical abilities. It was the weapon that ended the U-boat threat and secured Allied victory in the Atlantic. And for the men who experienced its relentless tracking in the darkness beneath the waves, It was the technology that marked their transition from hunter to hunted, from invisible predator to exposed prey, from confident warrior to victim of science they could not escape. The acoustic detection revolution that peaked in 1943 didn't end with World War II. It fundamentally reshaped how navies think about underwater warfare. The competition between submarine stealth and sonar detection continues today, both sides applying ever more sophisticated technology to an eternal contest. Modern submarines use advanced materials, complex propeller geometries, active noise cancellation systems. Modern sonar systems use artificial intelligence, quantum sensors, distributed arrays covering hundreds of square kilometers, but the fundamental dynamic remains unchanged from the moment U-954's hydrophone operator first detected HMS Duncan at impossible range. Sound propagates through water according to physical laws that technology can exploit but cannot fundamentally alter. Submarines that make noise can be detected by sufficiently sensitive hydrophones under favorable conditions. And once detected from beyond their own sensing range, submarines lose the invisibility that makes them effective. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The memorial at Möltenort, near Kiel, Germany, lists the names of 30,000 U-boat sailors who died in service during World War II. Visitors walking past the long walls of names see the dates of death cluster heavily in 1943, 44, and 45. The years when Allied acoustic detection had matured beyond German ability to counter. The years when the ocean became transparent and submarines became coffins. Among those names, Kapitänleutnant Ernst Bauer, killed in action April 17, 1943, when HMS Duncan detected his submarine from a range his training said was impossible, when 3 Allied escorts coordinated to trap U-954 using extended-range sonar, when the hunter became the hunted in waters that had suddenly become transparent to Allied technology. The story of German U-boat crews hearing American and British sonar from unprecedented distances is ultimately the story of how scientific research and engineering innovation defeat even the bravest warriors. How understanding fundamental physics provides advantages that courage cannot overcome. How the submarine force that nearly starved Britain into submission was itself hunted into near extinction by improvements in underwater acoustics. The pinging that German submariners learned to fear, the acoustic detection that found them from beyond their own hearing range, the extended range tracking that gave them no warning before being trapped, these represent warfare's transformation in the 20th century. Technology had become more important than tradition. Science had become more powerful than courage, and the ocean depths, which had protected submarines since their invention, had become transparent to those who learned to listen correctly. The lesson written in 30,000 submarine graves at the bottom of the Atlantic remains relevant 8 decades later. In modern warfare, technological superiority determines outcomes. Those who achieve it win. Those who fail to achieve it die. The Battle of the Atlantic proved this truth through 5 years of brutal combat beneath the waves, where Allied acoustic science defeated German submarine courage, and where the ability to hear at impossible distances transformed underwater warfare forever. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.